Linda Hirsch.
I'm Jim Carney, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
In September 2015, scientists announced the discovery in South Africa of a new species of human ancestor, Homo naledi. The team was led by an American paleoanthropologist and shed new attention on the field of physical or biological anthropology. Today, William Harcourt-Smith, a CUNY professor involved in the analysis of the new species, joins us to discuss this finding, along with the education of the next generation of physical anthropologists.
Exactly how do you translate world-class anthropology into the world of the undergraduate classroom? We'll stop into a basic anthropology class at Lehman College, led by Dr. Harcourt-Smith, later in the program to find out how. But we begin with Linda and her guest in the studio.
My guest today is William Harcourt-Smith, professor of anthropology at Lehman College and the CUNY Graduate Center. He is also a staff member at the American Museum of Natural History here in New York City. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You were recently involved in the momentous discovery and study of a new set of fossils that were found in South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. This is a new species of what we call a hominin. This is one of our closest extinct relatives. It was a sensational discovery. It was discovered at the bottom of a cave, which is very hard to get into. It was momentous in the sense that it's many hundreds. In fact, there's well over 1,600 specimens, which is very rare and very unusual in what we do, from many different individuals. And of course, the two really fascinating things about it are that it's a new species and that it was behaving in quite a complex way for something that had quite a small brain.
How do we know it was behaving in a complex way?
Very good question. And you know when scientists say that they're hedging their bets and trying to work out the answer. But in all seriousness,
I know you know the answer.
Yeah, I do know the answer. Well, I don't know if I know the answer, but right, we have the best hypothesis.
Supposition, right.
Exactly. So we're usually in these caves, you find you find a mix of everything. You find the remains of our relatives, of hominins, but you find the remains of antelope and rats and mice and birds and monkeys and all these different things, all mixed in together. Here, there's over 1,600 bones with only hominins, nothing else. I mean, one little rodent tooth, one tiny elbow, and that was it. It's very, very unusual. And by the law of averages, it shouldn't happen due to natural processes. So does that
speak to intentionality of some kind? Okay, like what?
Yes.
What
I won't go as, one would never want to go as far as saying burial, but they're obviously disposing of their dead. They're taking the bodies of these creatures to the dark part of the cave and they're throwing it down a hole. Now, the reason for that, who knows? It could be that he didn't want a smelly dead body. It could be something more sophisticated. But behavior like that is usually something we see in much larger brained, more culturally sophisticated members of our group. And this is a more primitive creature.
This may be a stupid question, but how do we know they were dead before we put them down there?
That's a good, well, you never know. No, we do know. We know based on the breakage patterns in the bones and various other features. There's a whole science called taphonomy, which is the science of burial after you die. And we very carefully looked at that and worked it out.
So what are the implications of a discovery like this?
The implications are severalfold. I mean, the implications in terms of, what is it that makes us human? We have all these this laundry list of things, and in the past we've thought about, well, intentional burial of the dead and sort of cultural behavior around death is a very human-like thing. This discovery isn't as far as that, but it has just an essence of it. They're disposing of their dead. They're not just leaving their dead wherever they are. They're not defleshing them or cutting them or doing anything weird to them. So, this again pushes back a quite sophisticated behavior, which has implications. It's a new species that has implications for understanding the evolutionary tree of our recent ancestors, and it has implications for how we define our genus. We're Homo sapiens, because our species is sapiens, our genus is Homo. And we've always thought that one of the hallmarks of being in the genus is walking on two legs all the time. But these creatures were also comfortable in the trees, which is quite interesting. So So it does alter a number of things.
Have we been able to date these specimens yet, or are we in the process of doing that?
No, we haven't, and that's killing me and all of us. These South African sites are very complex geologically. Dating them is not as easy as it is in other parts of the world, and it's just one of those things that hasn't happened. We've sent in every kind of team and every kind of expert to try and get a date, and we don't have anything yet. For me, the implications are interesting, whatever the date, but we do need it, and it would be wonderful for context.
Now, tell me a little bit about how you got involved in this.
I got involved. I mean, this is ridiculous. I got involved through Facebook, through social media. No, this was the first time in really in the history of our field and the history of the study of human evolution that a lot of things were done through social media. So. Basically, the excavators were recruited with an online advertisement via Facebook, and then the application to apply to work on the material, which was sort of aimed at what they call sort of early career scientists, people who were either just finished graduate school or were sort of tenure track like myself, and the ad went out on Facebook, and I sent in what I thought was a pretty persuasive letter.
Clearly it was.
I had a huge data set. You know, I've been around a little more than some of the others on the who applied, and I really pushed it. It's very rare for younger scholars to get the opportunity to describe and work on sort of new hominin fossils. It's
what was your specialty on this?
My specialty was the lower limb, and in particular the foot, which is really important for understanding the evolution of upright walking in humans. And so that was the main focus of my work down there, and I led the team to working on that part of the body.
And was Lehman College involved in this as well?
Absolutely. I mean,
how were they involved?
Well, they were first of all they involved because I was there.
Of course,
you know?
right.
But in order to get all the data together to compare the fossils to other fossils and then also to humans and our closest living relative, chimps and everything else, which is what we do, I had to get a lot of material scanned and processed and measured, and Lehman students were central to that.
Fantastic.
They're acknowledged in the papers. They were helping me here. They were getting things together. They were absolutely invaluable. I brought them down to the Museum of Natural History, and of course Lehman provided resources for me to do that. And we have a glorious 3D printer facility here. So I printed out casts of important things to take down, and so Lehman was involved at every level.
Now, what branch of anthropology is this, and can you give us a definition of this branch of anthropology?
Absolutely. The branch of anthropology is called physical anthropology in the United States. It's called biological anthropology elsewhere, and it's concerned with the evolution of humans and the way that we vary biologically. So it's always within the context of evolution, but it's interested in how we vary biologically and where we came from in a biological and evolutionary sense.
So this would not be cultural anthropology. When people think of Margaret Mead and
That's
Samoa,
right.
this is not that.
No, this is more like Mary Leakey, you know, or Louis Leakey. But there's other areas of physical anthropology. There's primatology, where people study primate behavior, people like Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey. There's forensic anthropology, you know, where people work on crime scenes, but they have that that training of working with skeletons and skeletal remains. And there's, of course, genetics, which is really big these days.
What got you interested in human evolution?
Great question. I always loved the past. I was always fascinated by nature. So those two things together, you know, in combination were always riveting to me. And I'll tell you a story. I was never told that such a job existed. I had no idea that you could be a physical anthropologist. You know, I think, you know, I thought if I was good at science, I had to go do medicine or be a dentist or something. And, you know, bit by bit, I fell into it as I realized you could actually do it as a career. And I was lucky to have an inspiring teacher as an undergraduate who taught a wonderful course in animal behavior, and there was an evolutionary part to it, and I was taken. And as a kid, I was always collecting fossils and picking things up and going outside. So, you know, the seeds were already there, and it just needed a great professor to kind of, to really sort of, you know, turn that into something. And then I applied to graduate school and got in, and very quickly realized it was the right thing for me.
Why do you think human evolution is so misunderstood and so controversial?
It's misunderstood and controversial in some countries, like this country, I'm afraid, which I love, but, you know, it is controversial here. It was less controversial for me growing up in the UK and in Europe, but
That's
here...
interesting. That's interesting in itself.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
and I think it's controversial because it does challenge traditional views of where we came from. And I think, you know, a human universal is that we ask questions of our origins, and traditionally religion and spirituality has sometimes, you know, stepped in to try and explain that. And as we've learnt more and more through discovery and through the scientific process, in some cases people have seen that as a challenge. And because it's perceived as a challenge, and therefore perceived as a challenge to people's faith, people are scared of it. It is actually a ridiculous way to think, because you can believe in something and know that evolution happened. They are completely non-overlapping worlds. So, you know, I always say that to people of faith who have problems with it. We know evolution happened. So it's controversial because it challenges thousands of years of a nice, convenient, clean explanation for things.
To ask you, how are early homonyms similar and different from us?
Depends on the homonym.
Okay, all right.
But the very earliest ones, and the most famous is Lucy. You know, Australopithecus afarensis is her formal name.
As I always refer to her.
Exactly. You know, it's a real mouthful. But she was pretty different to us. If you met her on the subway, you would be worried, and so would she. She was nothing more than a bipedal ape, but that matters. So what she had in common with us, that she was spending a lot of the time walking on two legs, not as long as us, not as much as us, but certainly a fair proportion. Go much later into human evolution, and we look at our closest extinct relatives, like the Neanderthals. They look pretty similar to us. Put them in a suit and tie and a hat on the subway, no one would notice, especially in New York. Everyone looks down, right?
Could be seeing them.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I see a few Neanderthals.
Yeah, right.
They probably think I'm a Neanderthal, you know. But you know, it depends on the hominin. And you know, with earlier hominins, they're very small-brained. They're obviously quite primitive in a lot of respects, but they do have some hallmarks of humanity, like walking on two legs. Much later, they're bigger-brained, you know, with sophisticated behaviors. And in some cases, they would look very similar to us, but they might have behaved differently, and that's important.
So, how does your research and your teaching intersect? As a professor of anthropology, what are your objectives? What do you want to do with students? And
my objectives are twofold, really, when it comes to instructing students on human evolution. The first is just to inspire them. You know, it's just for them to really, I try to instill a fascination in where we came from a scientific perspective, and to get them really think about that. So inspiration is the first major one. The second, of course, is imparting knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of information that you need to know in order to be able to better understand that. And so getting that across with quite a lot of complex terminology and complex theories and ideas and concepts. If I can do those two things, if I can inspire and I can get a reasonable amount of knowledge across, I've done okay.
what are some of the classes that you teach here?
So I teach classes at all levels. I teach an introductory class in human evolution and a shortened version of that. So we teach a longer and a shorter version of our introductory classes. And they really are all aimed at people who have to take science requirements. So, you know, you could be taking art or accountancy or something and you have to do a science requirement. And we teach them about human origins and our genetic origins and why we vary. We teach them about race and all that, which is, of course, is important and relevant, very important and relevant. And then I teach an upper level course in more advanced sort of human fossil record for those who are really serious about it. I have independent studies where students come and do projects with me, which is really fun. They can sometimes end up in published articles.
That's terrific.
You know, and they'll go on to grad school sometimes. So I sort of pride myself on that. And I actually teach a wonderful course on museum anthropology, where we basically go around the museums of New York and they learn about how to display anthropological information within a museum setting, the history museums, what they do, and they end up doing their own little exhibit here at Lehman, which is kind of fun.
Jim Carney had the opportunity to visit one of your classes and speak to some of your students, so
yeah,
let's hear.
He did.
All right, we're in the last big part of the course. There's many more lectures in this part than the rest of the course. We've done our first section on evolutionary theory. We've done our second section on primates and our place in nature. And
of the many areas of study you might find at an urban college in the Bronx, anthropology may not be at the top of the list. But at CUNY's Lehman College, the study of the evolution of man is a hot topic for both science majors and the general student population. This is greatly in part to the lineup of world-class faculty. Today's lesson is the impact that geology has upon evolution.
We break up these different parts of the history of the Earth into periods, into basically discrete units of time. And the cutoff points between them are basically worked out by geologists at conferences around the world.
Coursework ranges from basic introductory classes, such as this Introduction to Human Evolution course, to specialized graduate studies in the field through the CUNY Graduate Center. We recently sat in on a class and asked students, why anthropology?
And the reason why I like it is because it helps me understand and learn how everything evolves.
Okay, so you have the formations of new islands and new habitats. Okay, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, absolutely correct. What else?
Hey, I'm taking anthropology because it's really interesting. There's a lot of things involved with anthropology, like evolution and our old ancestry, and that really interests me. And so far, I really like this course. I've learned a lot of things that I didn't know before about like monkeys and primates and apes and evolution.
Yeah.
When did they discover these plates?
Very, very good question. This was a very controversial theory.
I'm taking anthropology because it's extremely important to understand human evolution, and I've always been interested in that. I've been studying it on my own, and I decided to take a class here, and it's very interesting.
You can work out what the polarity of the Earth was. And what I mean by that is that right now, when you use a compass, it points north. Everything points north. But it actually turns out that that wasn't always the case.
It's very interesting, extremely interesting, and I think it's very important for humans to understand their past, because if they understand their past, they will know where their future leads.
So there's actually a very deep history of the Earth's polarity in terms of its magnetic field, flipping to the north or the south. When and why that happens, well, we know when it happens, but we don't really know why. There's some theories out there, but it's really poorly understood. It's just one of those really interesting phenomena.
From the Introduction to Human Evolution class at Lehman College in the Bronx, I'm Jim Carney. Now, back to Linda and her guest in the studio.
Your students obviously are very inspired.
I think so. I hope so. They're great students. I love them.
Are we having the same issues in physical anthropology as we have in other areas in the sciences? And by that I mean involving more women and minorities.
Yes, we do. I mean, at Lehman College, I think one is very aware, being a minority-serving institution, one is very aware of the issue of minorities. And, I would say there's obviously problems of not enough women in the field of physical anthropology, but looking at the input of graduate students coming in, we have a lot of women coming in now, more than men actually, certainly in our program here in New York. So I feel like things are beginning to be gotten right on that level, but the issue of minorities I think is a really, really pressing issue. We don't have enough minorities applying, we don't have enough minorities getting in. I think it has to be a sort of bottom-up approach. Mm-hmm. We've got to be producing students from minorities who are A, interested in it and inspired by it, and B, are competitive. And that's my job. And I've gotten to...
So what have you done? I hear that you've already worked on this. What are some of the things that you've done to help address this?
I think the key is mentorship. And that means having students come work with me, not just through, in terms of sort of office hours for regular classes, but actually do internships and do independent studies and upper level courses. And if it works out, then we go to the next level. And I've had, in the last 2 years, 2 students get into grad school with full scholarships.
Terrific.
Both from minorities, both from Lehman College, at big international institutions and national level institutions here in the States. And those are firsts for Lehman, getting in there. And I'm so proud of them.
That's terrific. I know one of you graduate students, and she happened to mention to me that one of the things that she enjoyed so much about working with you is this kind of bringing together of the graduate student and the undergraduate student. Is that intentional on your part? And where does this happen, where these two different groups of students are able to mix?
Absolutely. No, the mixing of undergrads and grads is a really important thing. And I'm lucky enough to be also a research associate at the Museum of Natural History.
And what happens there?
And you know, I basically do a lot of my research there because I research in the collections there. We have huge collections of human remains and great ape remains and monkey remains. And what I do is I bring Lehman students down. They get to meet my grad students. They sometimes get trained by them. They work on projects together. They assist each other on things. A number of them have been on papers together as a result of this. And I foster a lab-style atmosphere where they all feed off each other. You know, they report to me, but I leave them to work on things, and it's happy and it's fun, and it's, you know, the science is serious, but the atmosphere is a pretty light, fun atmosphere, and I encourage a lot of cross-pollination intellectually. I think it's important.
Are your students aware that they're working with a renowned physical anthropologist?
With who?
That they are working with you, a professor of renown. Are they aware of that, do you think?
I don't know if they are.
I'm
very English about this. I don't like to think I'm renowned, but I'm. I think, you know, the junior ones probably don't. They might have seen me on TV or do a few things here and there, but you know, my job is to sort of get the knowledge across to them. Some of them do come in excited, and recently we had this big discovery, of course, and so
yes.
You know, a few of them like, oh, I saw you on TV, Prof, and that sort of thing, and they were really into it. And I think the important thing in a broader sense is for them to understand that this is coming out of Lehman College. You know, here we are in the city. We are not one of the big, rich private universities. We're a public-funded university, and yet we have more physical anthropologists here at Lehman than they do at Columbia. And we are producing top-notch research that's getting into the top journals, and not just me, the others too. You know, and I'm pretty proud of that. And I think for Lehman students to know that, both directly and indirectly, is inspiring, and you can see it on their faces. That sometimes, I hate to say it, they're a little surprised, and it's really nice to see that, and they realize that we're serious about
we have
it.
a great faculty,
we do,
which you are a representative.
You know, well,
what are some of the career opportunities that we might tell students who want to major in anthropology?
There are many career opportunities. I mean, I'm going to focus in that answer. In my answer, I'm going to focus on physical anthropology, but I want to add that there's many others. First of all, there's forensics, of course, so you can actually go and work in forensic osteology, and you know, every state has medical examiners' offices and local examiners' offices with groups of individuals who basically have to work on crime scenes, and that can be everything from something like the site of the former World Trade Center, you know, to a small local murder. You know, this is across the range. It's an incredibly central, important part of crime investigation. Of course, you can work in academic positions. You can teach physical anthropology and engage in your scholarship at universities. You can engage in museum work. Of course, you can work in conservation work, particularly if you're interested in primatology. You can work in molecular genetics labs. You can work on archaeological digs. In many states, you have to do specialist contract archaeological surveys before building projects happen. So there's a lot of work there, and so on and so on and so on. Great. You know, there's a lot out there you can do.
What's coming up in the field that we should be aware of? Anything you want to alert us to? What's next?
Well, I can't tell you too much, but I think in the general sense, I mean that in a local sense, you know, we have many more of these wonderful remains in South Africa in these cave systems, and more will be coming out. So watch this space on that front.
Okay.
The other thing I'd say is, you know, I never give the same lecture twice. There's always a new discovery. There's always something around the corner that's been found. I happen to be working on material at the moment that hasn't been published yet, and I can't talk about it.
Okay.
But, you know, more stuff is always coming in, which is exciting. I think one of the big, exciting new advances in the next 5 to 10 years are these very high-resolution techniques of looking inside bones and understanding what's going on in terms of locomotion and movement, tool-making abilities, walking, all these different things, looking at the internal architecture of bones with very, very high resolution. I think that's going to be a really expanding field. I'm excited about it.
Are we still evolving? Yes.
Are we still evolving?
Yes or no?
Evolution is always happening because there's many different ways that it can happen. Whether we're evolving in the sense of becoming something, you know, radically different to what we are now, we'll have to wait and see. But the proper biological answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time, so thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really interesting conversation. William Harcourt-Smith, professor at Lehman College and the CUNY Grad Center and the American Museum of Natural History. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Don't go away. We'll be back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
For over 2 decades, a consortium of 38 public high schools in New York City have held a waiver allowing students to earn diplomas by passing only a comprehensive English exam instead of the 5 state-required exams in other schools. Instead of standardized tests, students demonstrate subject mastery through experiments and reports and defend their work to outside experts. These schools report a graduation rate of 77% compared to 68% for New York City students. The results have earned praise and raised questions. Do they show that alternate assessments are effective substitutes for standardized tests? Or do they set a lower bar for reading and math preparedness? The debate continues.
Common Sense Media reports that teenagers average about 9 hours of entertainment media use a day. The 8 to 12-year-old set averages about 5 hours. This doesn't include time spent using computers at school or for homework. It's no surprise that many teens multitask while doing their homework, and most think watching TV or texting does not affect the quality of their work. Researchers found that while low-income students have less access to devices such as smartphones, they do tend to use them more frequently than their more affluent peers.
You may have already heard that 4th and 8th grade student scores on the nation's report card were down this year. In New York State and New York City schools, math scores fell in 4th grade, while reading scores were flat in both. Who or what's to blame for this overall drop in scores? The Common Core, excessive testing, and the Obama administration's education policies are taking first hits. But Peggy Carr, the acting commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics, cautions that one downturn does not a trend make. The Obama administration has already called for a curtailment of excessive standardized testing.
The educational website Dive reports that using games to teach concepts in a way that is more fun and interesting has picked up in K-12 classrooms and is now taking hold in colleges as well. But some educators say that while games can help students learn basic concepts, they can also prevent them from learning that some tasks are simply mundane and tedious. University of Michigan professor Kentaro Toyama says that students who expect everything to be fun will not be prepared for the responsibilities of the workplace. I'll say.
I was wondering, can you teach aerodynamics with Angry Birds?
Maybe.
Well, who knows? Well, that does it for this edition of EdCast.
Till next time, class dismissed.